was pinch hitting for Steve McElvain. He's with Diana in Tennessee and Memphis with his kids. They'll be heading back this way tomorrow, but so far for this weekend, I'll be with you for the next 2.5 hours. Tonight is the Dan Aldrich Show, and we'll be introducing him in just a minute. It's a good evening. We've gotten a good start on the creation. We'll be finishing that up tonight, including mankind and a deep dive, well, for me anyway, into DNA and the genetics of our makeup. And then there's a real treat that'll be especially helpful, I think, for you younger types over here, you Williams, with a special presentation that Dan has made on evolution and a careful examination of evolution from a scientific basis. There won't be a lot of scripture in that one, but that's what's ahead for the evening. So I'll pray and then we'll get started here. We praise you, Father, for the scriptures that are so clear and ultimately easy to understand. Thank you for language that you have made, that we can understand who you are and the things that you have made. And we're grateful for the things that we observe that ultimately reinforce the things that you have revealed by word to us. So thank you for the scriptures. Thank you for the work, the study, the long investigation into your world that underscores what you've revealed in the scriptures, and we ask that would be something that actually is deepened in each of our lives this evening. Now we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Dan Aldrich.
Yes, sir.
All right, a little interview here so that we all get to know who Dan is before he takes off. Dan, how far did you have to drive this evening to get here?
About 45 minutes.
Oh, you came in from?
I came in from Mission, Kansas, actually, south of there somewhere.
And what's this? I heard you've been in that same house for a long time?
About 32 years.
Okay.
Yeah. My
okay.
ride of 32 years.
That's it. So you grew up in Kansas City area?
Well, I was born north of the river. My dad was Liberty's barber in the 60s. And then I have a brother who's an athlete, more of an athlete than myself. And so he had asthma real bad, so he moved us to Arizona when I was a kid. And I grew up there in the desert. I was a rock hound. Astronomy and rocks and chemistry and stuff was kind of what I loved. And I grew up there, went in the military. When I got out, I came back to Kansas City because I love it here and have a lot of family here. And I ended up staying here now since 1988 when I've been here.
Okay, so before we get into your post-military training, you said you were in the military.
Yeah, I was on tanks. Didn't that sound fun? I have all my hands and fingers stuff. I'm happy with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I served during the Cold War and up to Desert Storm on various military vehicles of destruction. Yeah, M68, 3s, M1A.
Okay. How about your education and
Chemistry, really wanted to be a chemical engineer until I figured out that I didn't really like chemistry that much. And I spent some time seeking, what I really wanted to do. I ended up in information science. So I did that for 30 years at Sprint T-Mobile and design systems. And it was kind of fun to be involved in that because we built this first search engines and algorithms and things as the internet came around. And it was a great time to be involved in something like that was growing so much. So yeah, I did a lot of work on that. So chemistry and that kind of background in information sciences, I really like to talk about DNA and things like this.
Okay, well, just so you know, all the magic that we have up on the screen here is this guy's work. He's a master, and we're very pleased that you're here. Before we're done, a word about your family.
So I have a wife, 32 years, and we have a son who's 31, and he's married. And they live out in southern Overland Park. No grandchildren yet. This will be their third year, so the pressure's on. We're always asking, so what do we think here? You know? We're not getting any younger, you know, so if they want help with this deal, you know, we better get with the program. So, you know, we've been informed that, you know, that process has begun, but we don't have it yet, so.
And you grew up being a short earth and creationist?
Oh, no. I was the president of my science club. I was an evolutionist. I was a deep time evolutionist, a materialist. No, not a believer. My mom was a believer. She was the one sharing scripture with me. Didn't want to hear it. Used to read the Bible to argue with her. You can imagine how God used that. Okay, so yeah, so I knew the word real well. I didn't know what it was intended it was going to do in the end, but it's pretty crazy how that worked. It's quite a testimony.
All right, so you all understand now. Our rocket scientist here, Dave, started out as an evolutionist and an old Earth scientist as well. Let's see, Ward Brown, the doctor of veterinary medicine that spoke last week, grew up in the ranks of biology and evolution. And Dan here has had a conversion as well, so take it away.
Yeah, and so just so you know, I teach high school age kids, and some of the presentation materials you see tonight, we've tried out, experimented on college and high school age kids too. So you get the benefit of that guinea pig moment. So you guys have studied the time, matter, and energy, the Trinity of Trinities at the beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, past, present, future, Trinity, God, Elohim, Trinitarian, Godhead, plural, created what? He created time first, past, present, future. He created what next? The heavens, the space in which all things would be. And that has height, width, and depth to it. There's a Trinitarian nature to that. And yeah, matter and energy. What are the three states of matter? Yeah, man, I mean, you know, he's trying to send you a signal from the very first verse. That's why it's under such attack, because it is so deep and profound at the very beginning. And you guys know about light. It's got infrared, you can feel the heat. You guys got reptiles? Anybody keep reptiles in here? Nobody has snakes or lizards or anything? Why? I grew up in the desert, you know, so yeah, I've had lots of these things. They love infrared heat, right? So like a red lamp that you turn on, right? That has a really slow waves. You put your hand up to a light, what do you feel? Can you see the heat? No, but you can feel it. That's infrared. And then there's a visible spectrum. You can see me up here because these lights around here are on, and you can see this very narrow band of visible light that allows us to see things by. That's a physical thing you can actually see. You can feel this heat from the infrared spectrum, and then you get in to the ultraviolet. What does ultraviolet light do if you get too much of it? It'll smoke you. Yeah, it's the gamma rays and all of that stuff, and some of the communication things exist in that area too. But isn't that fascinating that light has this kind of Trinitarian nature as well, and water, again, is a gas or a solid or a liquid. So all of that stuff was early on. Dave spoke probably to you guys about the atmosphere and the sun and the moon and stars. He made the stars also, you know, and there's more of those than grains of sand and then some, right? So, did you learn anything kind of cool about sea and air creatures or animals last week? What'd you guys learn? Come on, man, there's not many of us here. Let's just talk. Okay? Yes, what'd you learn, brother?
About the turtles and their sonar.
Is that amazing? They actually have magnetite in their snout that aligns with magnetic pulses, and they can actually kind of tell by the angle of the magnetite. They can say, hey, you know what, I think this right here, this position right here, it locks in and remembers it. About 20 years later, they come back to where they nested, where they were hatched to nest again. And then, the coolest thing about that, there's a really neat book. I forget the guy's name that wrote it. It's called Animal Algorithms. This is a guy that got converted to Christianity who designed aeronautical systems. And he said, what's cool about it is you got these primary, secondary, and tertiary systems. These birds, like starlings flying, thousands, tens of thousands of miles a year, they're actually using constellations sometimes. Sometimes they're using magnetite in their beaks that they can actually see magnetic fields and kind of know directions that way, and maybe even landmarks. But we know this, their babies jump up out of the nest and they do it. So they have this information that's passed on to them to know how to navigate and go where and when. It's crazy. I mean, anybody that, so I was a materialist, right? So, material universe, everything material, that's all there is, right? But what are some key things that are not material? Information's not material. Language to interpret that information is not a material thing. So you can't explain language and all of these things, these interpretive languages for the information itself with material answers. So you're kind of half-baked sitting there. It doesn't work. You can't get there from here. So anyway, that is amazing how they met. Did he show you the little, I'm going to use one of those videos you probably saw last week, which shows the different types of animals, and it's just a little musical thing for about 2 minutes. I'm going to use that again because I wanted to show you that that's really what adaptation is. And that kind of teaches you that these animals are still in the same kinds, right? And so then you got to land animals. Did Kevin come last week? Did you get some dinosaur stuff? Was that cool? What's your favorite dinosaur? Do you have one? Most kids say, I like Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? Because they eat things. Just because they have big teeth doesn't mean they ate people, The deal is, it tells you how they, like pandas have sharp teeth because they shred bamboo all day long, so it doesn't tell you that they're meat eaters because they have sharp teeth or big teeth. One of the things that Dr. Ward Brown and I, we went to the Ark together, and they have a display of Tyrannosaurus Rex skulls, and you can actually kind of play with and see the teeth. Well, the roots of their teeth aren't that deep. If they were really tearing up stuff, they would have been dropping teeth like sharks, but they don't. So there's some interesting things about them. I hope you learned a lot about just how magnificent God is in his nature from what he made, because we're going to talk about you tonight. So in the first chapter of Genesis, from 26 to 31, you'll see this scripture. Again, we know there's this Trinitarian nature of God just based on the first verses of the Bible, but look at this. Let us make man in our image. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You saw them represented in the first verses of the Bible according to our likeness. So what likeness are we made in? This is always kind of a point of interest to me. What do you guys think about that statement that God makes? Let's go make you in our likeness. So does that mean you have a mind and a body and a spiritual nature? Or does it mean, what are other ways you've heard that represented? I'm interested. There's no right or wrong answer here. Well, there's probably some very wrong answers, but what would you think that means? To me, it is the great mind of the Father. It is the physical representation in Christ we have of the invisible God. And it's the spiritual nature, or the soul, the spirit that's within you, that's represented in all three of these, because we know his Trinitarian nature is a Father and a Son and a Spirit. So to me, that's it. But some people think more creatively with it. That means that we have the ability to create things and paint pictures and draw animals, and we have the ability to do things like him. I don't know, I was just interested if you take how you guys understand that. To me, it would be more like the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. right? So, however you take that. But he says, we're going to make you in his image. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. And he created them. And then God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. This is going to be important for later when we get to the tower. What did he tell them to do? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and every living thing that was on the earth. Then God saw everything he had made, and indeed, it wasn't just good, it was very good. Perfect. Before we blew it all up, which Dave's going to talk about next week. Dave gets the fun part talking about the fall and the two laws of science involved in that. The law of quantity and the law of quality. And we know we're in an entropy mode now because of that, right? So there was evening and morning, the sixth day. These descriptors with that word over 300 times in the Bible, that always means a 24-hour day. Sorry if you're a long earth, I'm going to fit billions of years in here. It doesn't really work from the Hebrew language. But here's the cool thing. If you look in the second chapter, you kind of get more detail on the first chapter overview. And you see this, God formed man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Did you know? How many of you guys take vitamins? Right? Why do you take them? Because you're deficient? Because somebody said, better take some vitamins. Or was it because you're deficient in some mineral, maybe magnesium, and it's just such a small percentage. If you're just out of whack just that little bit, you don't think right. It's crazy, isn't it? Well, guess what? If you look at the chemical makeup of a human being, you know what this is? This is pretty common soil. Has the same chemistry. Add water, right? Add some water here, and some more protein to the soil. But that's basically what you are. You're dirt. I hate to say it. It's true. How cool is that? He said he made us out of the dust of the ground, and now that we understand chemistry, we understand that, gosh, we're actually just made out of soil. And that's why you take those vitamins, because just a little bit of tuning and you're off, and forget about it. You get wacko if you don't have enough certain elements or minerals in your body. Well, what about this little guy, deoxyribonucleic acid? So who knows what is DNA? You hear this, DNA, and your eyes glaze over and all this stuff. Forget about it. It's a molecule, and it's designed to store data. It's a data system in a molecule. That's what this stuff is. Okay? It's incredible what it can do, what its capabilities are. And by the way, it in and of itself contains two things that are not explainable by material processes. Information and the different languages that are used to interpret the different information, both DNA and RNA, within these molecules. The stuff, the instruction manual to make you. It's actually in every living thing. It's in plants, it's in animals, it's in you. And when you get this whole system of DNA and RNA and all these different things together, it's called a genome. Okay, that's kind of a bigger term. But all that this thing is, all that this molecule does, is God designed it to be the system to house all the information that's required to replace cells in your body, okay? And to make another you, and to make another human. That's what this stuff does. Or make another plant, or a fern, or a turtle. They all have DNA. The problem, if you're a materialist like I was, is that 2/3 of this whole situation you can't explain with materialism. There's no language that can come about through a natural process or a material process, and there's certainly no language to interpret the information that's being communicated. So it's all kind of mysterious. This might be interesting to you. Let's learn a little bit about how the molecular machines within your genome, within this DNA components, these components, how they work to translate, copy, cut, paste, even strands of DNA, in your strands of DNA in these information. They have tails on them. So they have like a beginning and an end. They know where the information stops and starts. It's like periods in sentences. So as it's zooming along, you go, oh, there's one. That's that. I need that for that. Oop, there's that one for that. And so all this stuff is going on inside each cell of your body. You have contained within them these DNA molecules which are carrying the information so they can replicate themselves as cells die and get replaced. So let's watch this just a little bit and see how this goes.
DNA is a good place to start, the double helix molecule we always talk about. This is a scientifically accurate depiction of DNA created by Drew Barry at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. If you unwind the two strands, you can see that each has a sugar phosphate backbone connected to the sequence of nucleic acid base pairs, known by the letters A, T, G, and C. Now the strands run in opposite directions, which is important when you go to copy DNA. Copying DNA is one of the first steps in cell division. Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. At the end of this process, you have two identical DNA molecules, each one a few centimeters long, but just a couple nanometers wide. So to prevent the DNA from becoming a tangled mess, it is wrapped around proteins called histones, forming a nucleosome. These nucleosomes are bundled together into a fiber known as chromatin, which is further looped and coiled to form a chromosome, one of the largest molecular structures in your body. You can actually see chromosomes under a microscope in dividing cells. Only then do they take on their characteristic shape. Otherwise, the DNA is more strewn inside the nucleus. The process of dividing a cell takes around an hour in mammals, so this footage is from a time lapse. You can see how the chromosomes line up on the equator of the cell. Now, when everything is right, they are pulled apart into the two new daughter cells, each one containing an identical copy of DNA. Now, as simple as this looks, the process is incredibly complicated and requires even more fascinating molecular machines to accomplish it. So let's look at a single chromosome. One chromosome consists of two sausage-shaped chromatids containing the identical copies of DNA made earlier. Each chromatid is attached to microtubule fibers, which guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different proteins working together to achieve multiple objectives. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated molecular mechanisms inside your body. The kinetochore is central to the successful separation of the chromatids. It creates a dynamic connection between the chromosome and the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dyneing motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction.
Now wait a minute. This is going on within the molecule. Hold on. The little walking guy, did he evolve to be the walking guy? Could he have ever evolved to be the walking guy to even divide the first cell in your body? Or any body? No. In fact, the DNA or the information to create one of the little walking guys requires language and an interpretation of data and mechanisms to build the little walking guy. You see the trap you're in? You have to have both at the same time to have this happen. And not only that, the scale at which this is operating. How many times per second is your human genome, are the cells within it, are the little walking guys copying cells, separating them and replacing them per second? 23 million times just now. There, they just did that. What do you think happens if they make a lot of mistakes? Mutations happen. Do you think mutations do happen? Oh yeah, they happen. But they're not positive things. You know, very rarely are these mutations, they're deleterious mutations. They're harmful things. They really don't help things. They really hurt things. And there's actually little correction guys that run around and fix these things. That we aren't even talking about those guys. Who made those guys to correct things, preemptively strike the problem before it could even have existed if evolution were true? It's not possible, man. Forget about it. It's not possible. We'll talk more about that later. But look what he made inside of you. There, 23 million times right there, Carmen. There, 23 million times. Just right there, that moment, all that stuff went down. If it didn't, you'd be dead in minutes. Those cells are being regenerated, copied, and replaced, and they all have functions. These little acids become proteins, these little proteins become tissue. Those tissues know somehow I'm liver tissue, and they cloister together with liver tissues, and they replace things so that you're who you are. But Dave's going to talk next week about the second law, which is true. Entropy, things are falling apart over time since the fall. So over time, your liver just doesn't behave like it should have. And eventually, it fails. And we're on physically. But thank God for Jesus, because we're here spiritually. So, how much data is in the world? I did this stuff for a couple of decades, right? Data and information sciences and things, right? So, we're talking about, what a gigabyte is. We're talking about all the information in the world. How many of you techie people in here have at least a gig drive on your Xbox or a gig drive on your smartphone? No, not, or I mean a terabyte drive, let's say. Terabytes? You got one? Okay, yeah, I feel you. I've got a terabyte Xbox at the house. I understand, right? What if I'm telling you that we are estimating that the world, and this is actually, we're not even here yet, but it grows so much per week, it's ridiculous because of you guys posting stuff on Instagram. But 70 billion terabytes of data exist in the world. 70 billion terabytes of data. AI is basically tapping in artificial intelligence, is basically tapping into trends and things from this to kind of figure out what they want to sell you, right? Or where you're going to go so they can figure out what you're doing. Because they don't have any nefarious purposes, do they? They don't have any. Okay, so let's just say you had the cash for a terabyte iPhone or Google phone. Well, knowing how many people we have, let's just estimate 8 billion. That means, everybody in the world would get 9 of these phones per person with a terabyte on it Put this in perspective, how much data is in the world. Everybody in here could walk out of here tonight with 9 smartphones, terabyte smartphones, carrying data. In fact, every person in the world, and even with the newer iPhones, we're talking 0.31 inches per, they'd stack 342,000 miles high. That's how much information just in iPhones is in the world. Well, I told you how efficient DNA is at storing data, right? By the way, that's a lot of pounds of iPhones, right? Well, consider this, based on some stuff going on in the Swiss Institute for Technology and all those guys over there. They're thinking that you can do this type of data storage using DNA. It seems to be the most efficient method to store and retrieve data because it works in 4 dimensions. It actually takes your information, runs it left and right in a strand at the same time, then it wraps it all up. And it folds it in such a way that when things fold over one another, they actually mean something too. That's right. And there's these machines that can interpret that information and go, oh, yeah, that's a liver tissue right there. That's a protein I need to make liver tissue. Let me take that over to the liver factory. That's what's going down. Now, nobody knew this as recent as even 5 or 10 years ago. But we know this now. It's becoming just ridiculous to believe that this happened by time and chance and billions of years and all that. But how much data does that mean? How much DNA material do we need? Do we need to capture the entire world's data? About 4 ounces. Not 343,000 miles of iPhones, a terabyte iPhone stack. We need 4 ounces. That is a quarter cup. So that's like a stick of butter, right? Is that a quarter cup? Am I right? That's a half a stick. Half stick of butter. And a half stick of butter equivalent DNA, the whole world's data. You think that happened by chance? Come on, man. So I used to think that until you actually understand what's going on. And then it just becomes stupid to think that way. And you think, man, what was I thinking? But I needed that because I didn't need God in my life. See, so I didn't want any part of that. Sir Fred Hoyle, stellar-nucleosynthesis, this guy over in Cambridge, just some dummy here. He says, the chances this happened by chance are literally of a tornado sweeping through Tonganoxie. Sorry, guys, you guys did a lot of them out there. And assembling a 747, not just assembling it, but powered up, fueled up with a flight plane and a crew ready to take off. It's ridiculous to think anything else. God made you in an amazing way. A way you can't, the more we learn, the more you should be learning how awesome not only is He, but how much He has poured into you to make you who you are. You are valued so much He would die for you. That is a lot. Okay, I love to talk about parallel systems, more so when we do the evolution stuff. But these systems, you have to have multiple systems that come on all at the same time, like the 747, for it to be functional. You can't just have one thing happen. You have to have multiple things happen. And they all have to have some kind of pre-planned engineering to put them together at the same moment in time, like the eye and the brain. But the ear is an amazing thing. Check this out.
Does our hearing system provide evidence that the Bible's account of human origins is true? That humans were created instantly by God in His own image? Let's take a look at the evidence to find out. Our sophisticated hearing system is made up of 5 separate components that don't make any sense by themselves, but when combined together, they make a complete system that allows us to hear. It all starts with the outer ear, which is specially shaped to capture sound waves so they can travel through the ear canal. These sound waves press against our eardrums and wiggle 3 tiny bones called the hammer, anvil, and stirrup that amplify the signal by a factor of 1.7 times using leverage. This mechanical process converts to a hydraulic process by pressing against the cochlea, which again amplifies the signal, this time by a factor of 22 times. The fluid inside the cochlea moves over 20,000 microscopic hair cells that are connected by tiny molecular linking springs, causing an electromechanical transduction process that transforms the sound vibration into a neural signal that is immediately comprehended as speech. Just how did evolution dream all of this up? These 5 separate systems, each of which is purposeless and meaningless without the others, all connecting to make an overall hearing system that truly shows intentional design. Without the cranial hearing nerve, what good are thousands of multi-length hair cells that interpret various sound frequencies? If the hair cells were not bathed in a solution with the perfect ratio of potassium and calcium, how could they transfer the sound signal? What purpose would the cochlea serve without the 3 tiny ear bones that amplify the signal just enough for the whole thing to work? And did you know there's even a tiny tendon between the hammer and anvil that shifts the stirrup backward to protect the ear when sounds are too loud? How did chance evolution think that one up? Our hearing system is even self-lubricated with drainage tubes. And to think, this entire system runs on energy from what we ate for breakfast. Our hearing system has been carefully engineered to take invisible sound waves through a complex system that turns them into electrical signals that are heard as sound and immediately comprehended as speech. What's amazing is that we even do this in stereo. Having ears on both sides of our head enables us to determine the direction and distance of sounds almost immediately. Our brain even tracks how long it takes for sound to travel from one ear to the other to determine speed. How amazing is that? Our hearing system even does all of this while keeping our balance along the pitch, roll, and yaw axis. Realistically speaking, how could something like this evolve? Doesn't the design explanation make more sense? How could such an interconnected, interdependent, complex hearing system arise by mere chance with no intentional design? Even the starting systems in cars, which also have 5 components, are obviously put together by a designer to serve an overall purpose that is only evident when they are all put together in a certain way. Indeed, the 5 components of our hearing system were put together at the same time when we were made as complete, functioning humans who are well equipped for taking dominion over this planet God gave us. Some random hodgepodge of matter plus energy and time has never produced something with such function, purpose, and cohesiveness, with all of the independent parts requiring the other to make anything of use or value. Truly, we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
What do you think? Is God pretty awesome? Do you think that you're just a product of time and chance? Not a chance. If you believe that, I mean, just wait for the evolution stuff. I mean, it's just ridiculous. How wonderful. Is God awesome though? No. Amen. What are the odds that happened by chance? Well, some people, actually we had another video, Dave, I think we've got it in yours we used for the Chinese kids down at Wichita State, the engineers and stuff. But this one's pretty good. I'm not going to say it's as good as Dave's, but Dave's going to have a good one when he does his. Yes, sir. You have a question?
I thought we were going to answer questions.
You want to ask a question?
No, I thought we were going to. Are you going to do a video?
We're going to do this one. This is going to be the odds of you being made as wonderful as you are. Watch and see what you think it is. Did you have a question that to ask or not?
No, I thought you were going to ask us a question.
Oh, okay. And so you're raising your hand in anticipation of me asking you a question. Okay, I like that. Preemptive strike. Here we go.
Just as English letters convey a particular message depending on their arrangement, the sequences of chemical bases along the spine of the DNA molecule convey precise instructions for building proteins. The arrangement of these bases directs the arrangement of the 20 different kinds of amino acids that make up protein molecules. Proteins in turn perform a vast array of critical jobs inside cells, catalyzing reactions, processing genetic information, and forming the structural parts of molecular machines and other biological structures. Building new animals requires many new protein molecules. And building new proteins requires new biological information.
I used to ask my students a question when I was teaching. You want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? And they would know. They would say code, or software or instructions, a program, all those are the correct answer. To generate a new function in a computer, you have to have code, you have to have instructions. The same thing turns out to be true in biology. This is the great discovery of the second half of 20th century biology, that information is running the show in biological systems. To build a new form of animal life requires cell types, requires proteins, and therefore requires genetic information. And that's the big question that the Cambrian explosion presents. If you want to think about how to build an animal, how would these animals get built, you have to have some explanation for the informational requirements of their construction.
According to modern evolutionary theory, new proteins and new forms of animal life arise through random genetic mutations, sifted by natural selection. But in an alphabetic text or a section of computer code, random changes typically degrade meaning or functionality and ultimately generate gibberish.
As we've come to appreciate the digital or typographic character of genetic information, it raises some really interesting questions about the efficacy of that mutation-driven mechanism. We know from computer code, for example, that if you start making random changes to a section of computer code, you're much more likely to degrade the information that's there already than you are to come up with a new operating system or program.
This problem has long been recognized by computer scientists, mathematicians, and engineers, including a group from MIT who convened a now famous conference at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia in 1966. These scientists met to consider whether the random mutation natural selection mechanism could conceivably generate enough biological information to build a new animal or even a new protein in the time available to the evolutionary process. One of these scientists was MIT engineering professor Murray Eden.
No currently existing formal language can tolerate random changes in the symbol sequences which express its sentences. Meaning is almost invariably destroyed. Murray Eden, MIT.
Eden knew that random changes to alphabetic or digital characters inevitably degrade the information in any section of alphabetic text or digital code, and for a very good reason.
Whether you're talking about digital code in a software program or a section of text in an English sentence or book, or the genetic text in DNA, there are vastly more ways to arrange the relevant characters that convey the information in a way that will produce gibberish than there are that will produce function or meaning.
Eden and his colleagues suspected that the genetic code faced a similar difficulty. When it came to producing new genetic information, at least enough to generate a new protein, the random mutation natural selection mechanism had to deal with what mathematicians call a combinatorial problem. In mathematics, the term combinatorial refers to the number of possible ways that a set of objects can be arranged or combined. In genetics, the combinatorial problem poses a severe challenge to the random mutation natural selection mechanism. To understand why, imagine a thief who would like to steal a beautiful new bike. All that stands between the thief and the bike is a lock with 4 dials, each marked with the numbers 0 to 9. But there is only one correct combination that will set the bike free.
The reason the bike lock works is that there are vastly more ways of arranging those numeric characters that will keep the lock closed than there are that will open the lock.
A thief without knowledge of the combination must guess the right combination from among 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 possibilities. That's 10,000 possible combinations, which usually would be more than enough to defeat a random search for the one right combination. Yet there is still a way the thief might succeed. If he has enough time to try enough combinations, he might eventually identify the right one by chance. For example, if trying each combination takes 10 seconds, then in 15 hours an especially diligent thief could try more than 5,000 combinations, or more than half of the total possible combinations. In that case, he would be more likely to succeed than to fail in opening the lock. But now imagine a much more complicated lock. Instead of 4 dials, this lock has 10 dials. Instead of 10,000 possible combinations, this lock has 10 to the 10th power, or 10 billion possible combinations. With only one combination that will open the lock out of 10 billion, it's much more likely that the thief will fail, even if he devotes his entire life to the task. So what about relying on random mutations to search for a new DNA sequence capable of directing the construction of a new functional protein? Would such a random search for new genetic information be more likely to succeed or fail in the time available to the evolutionary process? In other words, is a random mutational search for a new gene or protein more like the search for the combination on the 4-dial lock or the 10-dial lock? The scientists at the Wistar conference were unable to definitively answer that question because at the time, no one could adequately quantify how hard the search problem was.
So in the late 1960s, one could make these arguments based upon analogy to things we understood, written language, computer code, but we didn't have any experimental data to show whether those analogies actually suited the biological case. So no one could come up with the exact numbers to answer these questions back then.
Molecular biologists at the time did know that the number of possible combinations corresponding to any given sequence of DNA is extremely large and grows exponentially with the length of the molecule in question. For example, corresponding to one short protein 150 amino acids long, there are 10 to the 195th power other amino acid arrangements of that length. That's an unimaginably large number. But scientists in the 1960s didn't know how many of those arrangements were actually functional. They didn't know, in effect, how many combinations would open the lock. That didn't stop evolutionary biologists from speculating. Many argued that there must be a high proportion of functional sequences among all possible sequences, so that a random search for a new functional sequence would have a high probability of success.
The way they did that is to say, well, maybe biological sequences are not nearly as finicky, not nearly as picky about which characters are where as written language is or as computer code is. And so that's the track that they took. That maybe proteins don't really care which amino acid is where, and there's a great deal of variability, and therefore you can have the same function performed by a huge number of protein chains and a huge number of genes.
But recent experiments in molecular biology and protein science have replaced speculation with data. These experiments have established that DNA-based sequences capable of making functional proteins are in fact extremely rare among the vast number of possible sequences. Just how rare? After working at Cambridge University, molecular biologist Douglas Axe set out to answer that question, using a technique called site-directed mutagenesis. His experiments enabled him to estimate that for every DNA sequence that generates a functional protein of just 150 amino acids in length, there are 10 to the 77th amino acid arrangements that will not fold into a stable three-dimensional protein structure capable of performing that biological function. One correct sequence for every 10 to the 77th power incorrect sequences. That's equivalent to searching for just one combination on a lock with 10 digits on each of 77 dials. To put this in perspective, keep in mind that there are only 10 to the 65th atoms in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Could random genetic mutations effectively search a space of possibilities that large in order to find even a single functional protein sequence?
So given that you have this very daunting probability, 1 in 10 to the 77th power, how could something that improbable happen? Well, as we know generally with improbable things, the way that they can happen is by having lots and lots of opportunities for them to happen. So for life, those opportunities take the form of individual living organisms in which a mutation could occur that could conceivably provide a solution. No matter how rare it is, if you get enough of these opportunities, it can become probable. So the question is, if the number is 1 in 10 to the 77th power, if that's the improbability that must be overcome, would the number of organisms that have existed on the planet since the beginning of life come close to matching that number, and it turns out that it doesn't come anywhere close.
Wait a minute, you don't even have enough time using 13, 14 billion, whatever we're saying these days, to even get one functional. These proteins have to get together to become tissue, right? To make you. And all these tissues, these different cell types, cells that make these tissues up, have to then cloister together to become functioning livers and hearts and lungs and everything. Just think about how ridiculous that is, to think that somehow by chance you're going to get these proteins and then they're all going to get together and go, yeah, you know what to do. We're all going to be a heart today. You know, we're going to become tissue that becomes a heart or a functional mechanism. Think about your ear or your eye or something complicated like that. It's just blows your mind how awesome God is to design this system the way He has. And we're just looking at the train wreck, you know. We're after the fall here. We don't even know what the perfect state looks like. You know, we're just kind of, D.L. Moody once said that. He said, you know, I feel like, you know, we've never seen the train run. You know, we're just looking at the wreck, you know. So when we see a beautiful sunrise or something, but we've never seen what very good looks like. Do you think there's a chance, even just, you say there's a chance, is there any chance whatsoever that you could be created somehow out of time and chance and matter banging together out there in the universe to make something as sophisticated and complex as you guys? Is there even a chance that that's possible? No, there really isn't. Because if you believe in the laws of probability, the scientific laws of probability, once you get up over 15, 16, 17, 10 to the 16th, 17th power, it's impossible. And we're talking 70, 80, 100. It's just to get a single protein. Well, Romans 1:20, Dave, we got to go to South Carolina. Maybe you can tell people about that here in a little bit or something between things or whatever. But think about this. How brilliant is it for God to record through Paul this, knowing what you know today about genetics and molecular machines inside of you from all the way back to the sixth day of creation. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, His eternal power, His Godhead, so that they are what they, as in the world, and as in us, were without excuse. Although they knew God, they didn't glorify Him as God, nor were they thankful. They became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Look, we get so dang smart, we get stupid. That's my translation, right? Professing to be wise, they became fools. And you see it every single... How many sexes are there in animal and humankind? There's either a double X chromosome or an XY. Genetically, you can figure whatever. That's fine. I'm cool with that. But I'm just telling you, there's only two. By the way, the girls, you guys have the double X. The guys have the XY. So what did the double X chromosome say to the XY chromosome? Do these genes make me look fat? And with that, you're up to a break. But I will take a few questions because you have like 4 minutes. You guys got any questions right now? Because we're going to, this just keeps going and it gets better. We're going to talk about evolution next. Okay?
Anyone at all? Good question.
Did you enjoy that?
Very.
What was the coolest thing you saw? Because we need this feedback because we're constantly improving. What did you really enjoy?
The ear deal.
The ear, yeah.
I just find that so. I was when the music turned on. I was really trying to like focus on my ear, but
Yeah, you think about what's going on in there, right? Just so that you can hear that.
yeah,
And
it's
this-
fascinating. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, you know, there was a guy, he's passed away now, but Ward and I got to hear him speak in person from Washington University in St. Louis. He was speaking down at the Creation Museum, and He was, is it Dr. Minton? Is that his name? Minton. And his deal was the eye. But he did the seeing eye and the hearing ear, the verse from Proverbs. He covered that. He was telling us about the structure of the lens of your eye and just how unbelievable it is and how it sees things upside down and flips it around. So you're actually seeing that. And the reason why it does that is so that it doesn't get in the way of the mechanics of your eye, all the required things back there. It has to do that so that it doesn't interrupt anything. What did we wander around for a million years and not see until, hey, look, I can see, and somehow my cells that could see were transformed over the day so he can see. That doesn't magically happen in populations either. You can't pass positive mutations onto somebody else in your kind.
Another question. Anyone?
Yes. Name and question, please.
Not a question, just something that I like. I'm not really a science background person, so having the law combination as an example really helps to put that probability into terms that make sense for me.
Yeah, actually, it's way beyond even what this video has, because some of the latest work that's been done, it just takes it to just a ridiculous number. It's just unbelievable. So, and I do think, Dave, we had it in Wichita. I'll make sure it's in your presentation for next week so these guys can see it. It's crazy. And you think about the mind that put that together. That's the mind of God. It's beyond what you can even comprehend, which is it should be if he's God, right? Yes, sir. Shoot, we can hear you. Go ahead, man.
You might often hear things like, well, our DNA is like 95% the same as an orangutan's.
No, I'm going to get you on that.
Are you going to address that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No, actually, the guys that did that study chopped off a bunch of chimp DNA and chopped off a bunch of human DNA to kind of make them look similar. But really what we used to think was junk DNA, so when I was an evolutionist, we loved to think that only 2% of the DNA is useful. Well, the problem is all the timing sequences, like when to do things and all of the instructions and things like that and the timing of things, that exists all throughout that DNA. So back in the ENCODE project, which was now over 20 years ago, they found 80% of the DNA was you had to have. If you're an evolutionist like I was, you had to have a lot of junk DNA because you had to try something that didn't work, try something that didn't work, try something that didn't work. And now we're up over 90% has been identified as absolutely functionally required for different organs and things to have, or vessel organs, like organs that we don't really need an appendix. We can throw that out. No, you really need that appendix. Don't cut that out, unless you have to. But yeah, we'll talk about the chimp DNA, but one of the great studies that was done is on how dissimilar we actually are, from their DNA. But if the secret is this. I'm sorry, what was your name, sir? Pat. The secret is this. You have to have 98% similarity in DNA between two animals or people or whatever. You have to have 98% to say they're really related from the same kind. So if you look at the science, the pseudoscience, and the real falsehood of that whole study, you'll see that they were chopping off things everywhere, trying to get it up into that 98 percentile similarity. And wait till I show you kind of what happened with that. It's terrible. But it's entertaining, but it's sad. It's in textbooks that you're 98% chimp. That you're not. It's a vast difference. I think it's, we'll see it in the next presentation.
All right.
Anything else?
Let's
Did you enjoy that? Yeah. Okay, let's go. We got more. Okay, take a break.
15 minutes. Let's be back at quarter after. And we'll start in on the evolution creation presentation. Downstairs we have water and snacks. So quarter after.
Let's go. When's he coming to town against you? There's always that. Yeah, you always have to go back and revisit. Sit down, go through and say, here's a point I want to make. Let's put it on.
That's what he says. Put those on
As long as we're getting but we're bound to forget something, so we don't want to do that. At least if it's up there, it's like, it's a Noah's Ark cartoon. Cicadas to shut up.
That's my contribution, Dave.
Okay, so I taught math. Okay, so this is the probabilities. Who were the people who did the study that came up with the 10 to the 77th?
Discovery Institute.
Discovery Institute.
Stephen Meyer.
Okay.
Well, the first study presented in my
Well, I'd like the modern ones at the moment.
Well, this new one that, well, you're going to see it.
You said Meyer, Stephen?
Stephen Meyer. Yeah.
Do or don't.
He's a cell biologist.
Okay.
I think you did enjoy that. His books are crazy good. He's going to have a more updated one for next time. It's just getting more stupid. Thank you for that.
My best math teacher I had said she hated that. She's like, we're going to go through this together. We're going to make this make sense. What is she doing? She works.
That's the problem. Yeah.
I mean, I hated nursing school just in general. But I love it. I mean, I'm retired now. I'm still retired. Yeah. I mean, parts of it are very first combined with, I was ready to have like degree or orientation interpretive, but it's like high stress. Do this, and prepare for this, and do this. Oh, and you can't just experience it. You have to like do a little write up, you know, like on this or that. I don't know. That's like adding all the stress.
That's why I thought with music, where I was like, okay, like I'm already doing all the nasty, not fun parts of music before I get to college. I'm like, if I can stomach this and still enjoy it, like I probably got saved.
Anyway, it was taking her so long, she was like, I have to go learn something else, Mom. And then she found out that the reason I was thinking so long is because they wanted her no home.
One time I was there, like, she was there for Super Bowl, there were people practicing. I was there at like 1 a.m. and this guy was like unpacking a Lego with a small baby.
Yeah, it's exponential.
No. Then I went to a master class, literally got freaked out by some cooler guy. I'm like, but she does so much. It's like, just tell all my kids, it's like, don't go in there. It's like, don't do this.
She does really good work, and they were real impressed with it. So they wanted her to until they worked it out.
He's trying really, really hard, man. I can't look at that baby. It's got an ear.
Well, there she works.
I kind of like that. No, next door, my practice line was playing he's like 7 hours straight. I was like,
photography. She takes
like,
pictures of
I'm
things
getting
people
teared
have
apart. I was like, I'm so sick of hearing that. It's not getting better. You're just digging your groove. You're not strategically practicing this. You're just running it hours and hours.
You're just digging the groove of
well, how does he
I can't help you with that. I don't want to know anymore.
Because you're playing the whole song, which you can play well. And that's like one of my, I feel like I could report my student. She's like a freshman at Free State. And I was like, you sound so much better after we do lesson together. And then the next week you're like, it's not bad, but it's not like, you you not know how to practice, or you just like honestly don't do it at home? She was like, I don't have the self. Just don't practice in an effective way. I'm like, that makes more sense.
That was
Yeah.
my parents.
Signed up and required to do all kinds of stuff. This was,
So different now.
no, it was, teaching voting. So they made her do a whole bunch of stuff. You're welcome.
Honestly, that's my older brother's dad. She's like, I broke up with him.
So for 3 years, and she was taking all kinds of performance classes.
The piano was like quite in the
Lot of
like
time
kitchen
in
dining
that
area where I was like,
So she felt like she was spinning her wheels, so after 3 years and a trip to England, she waited out. They did it that summer.
But honestly, like that is one thing, like with homeschooling, that was so much easier because that's when other than that, we probably did longer because, well, no, because it's like when you're little and it's all regimented into the day. If you're making up your time blocks for the day.
My mom has Irish Orthodox, and my mom is just a type of personality. I don't think if I hypothetically homeschooled, I would be that effective. But it's like 8 a.m. you had to be down at the breakfast table, and you could not do this pajamas crap. You had to actually be there. And then she made me practice piano from like 8 a.m. to like 11 o'clock. And yeah, like all through like middle school and high school.
Wow. No. Wow. Ours was.
It bumped up in high school. Like I think maybe it was like 2 initially. Wow.
Well, see, it didn't happen by accident.
Yeah. It built. You know, again, I was like 10, 11 and stuff and actually doing competition. So it was like, we're going to, that's my mom's attitude. She's like, we're not going to make you do it, but if you're not going to practice, we're not going to waste our money on it. I was like, I want to quit. She's like, well, you'll practice. Like, I don't want to. It's like, well, quit. It's like,
We just have like, yeah.
Like, that's why I feel so bad as a music teacher, honestly, and stuff where it's like, I just don't understand these parents. Like, I understand if you don't make your kid practice at home. I've gotten past that. But parents who don't even like, I have several students who have taken their kids at home. I'm like, your child is not even learning how to read music. Like, we're at such a base level. They don't even take their book home, and they're like, it's fine. It's like, why are you paying me money? I feel bad. Like, my parents like sacrifice so much just for like we're getting our money's worth. Like,
I think somehow.
it's like osmosis. Like, oh, they're music, oh, they're music, it's fine.
She enlisted in the international government, trained as a medic.
But then, once you really fell in love,
She was first married and she had been doing that for a couple years.
I mean, yeah, different happening there, we would fight over it. I remember like knockdown fights over because it was all about like how you're this is elementary school. There was not an order to what you had to do things around that. I mean, it was breakfast, and I can't remember if some things like before or after, but it all had to be done by the time like this other main first subject started. So it was like breakfast and your outdoor chores in the barn, and your piano practice, and then your Bible reading. I don't know. It seemed like we always like had an order we wanted it to go in, but it was like who got to what first. I literally remember a lot fighting on the piano bench. Like you're racing in there for that. I'm like, I don't know why we're here and what happened. And it's like, had to be in it.
Yes. I guess I never thought about that. It's like, because my brothers quit. My mom made it 2 years of sport and 2 years of piano, so I did like upward soccer. We lost every single game except for our last one we tied. It's like, yes, sporty family. But yeah, it's like.
That was the time when all three of us were taking it.
Yeah, exactly.
That was also when you all sort of went to the same lessons there, way through your siblings last
My
time.
younger brother, he snuck a Game Boy into the bathroom, so during his piano lesson time, like I would have to be fine, and my younger brother would just be like, "Do I go to the bathroom?" and just be in there for like 30 minutes.
That's smart.
That's how he got out of piano. He got out of a lot of things really.
The second guy she was married for 2 years. It wasn't that. I went there last summer never
Yeah,
seen
they were
it.
so annoying. It's, they were totally, they were like, just leave it.
You kept saying to tell her, well,
I'll be there.
I was sitting there going, two of your and then
Newspapers.
next night I read it.
I mean, it's just become a general thing. She asked me to do something, and now it's just a joke. I'm kind of pissed. It's just like, if he doesn't yell at me,
She's gonna buy a house.
I mean, you know, I didn't want this job to have to wait because I was giving you the easy job, like just like I love the dishwasher, so that I could do this, this, and this. And so now I'm like, it's all like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she's trying to fill a hole in her. She's trying to cram as much into
Guys,
it as she
guys,
can. Nothing's working.
They can poop so many times a day.
She's standing on top of the pile, jumping on it, trying to cram more.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know. Because how could you just-
Yeah, I know.
He was legit, but nothing happened to her, like,
But the reason that happens is because when you're like busy or doing
They're all three smart.
it'll be like
But she's never got to do anything, so now she's
it's like
do
you have no control because it's like a must and you're like
She's a middle child, so I know middle child is supposed to be different, and I don't know if I want to say she's a middle child, that's what's
Oh,
happening.
exactly. That's why, like, my dad would get home and my mom would be like a really good housewife and have it ready so like he gets home. Then he like was a very introverted person and would have had to deal with annoying, frustrated coworkers all day. And he'll just want to like go to the bathroom and have some him time. And she's like, why every time do I have dinner on the table? Does he go to the bathroom? And like, yeah, it's like we're all sitting here waiting for him to pray. It's like,
yeah.
yeah.
I know, it's better to just
Well, we miss you. Well done.
I know, I mean, my teacher's not the same at all, so much to things, but when it was a little more on the same schedule, it was still like, the first decisions to like, have an idea or something. Even if it was to text you and say, pick up pizzas, or to say, something's starting, it's just the idea of like, everyone getting home and there's no plan. I cannot come up with a plan in that void of everybody.
Her husband adopted a 9-year-old girl.
That's like too often. It's like, like my schedule's a lot better now and stuff. Like I'm not doing it really. It's like I just finished teaching, and that's the end of it. It's like we're Jeff and I are just really bad for each other. Where I'm like, oh, my husband, my dad, I can take his groceries and stuff now. And then he's like, you want to go get terrible? And I'm like, yeah. Where I'm like, you want to go get ice cream? He's like, yeah.
The adoptee, she started pushing the baby brother.
She got it. She got it.
But it was way like when you have like your,
I chop it my day before I start teaching. It's like, and then I'm committed to it. I'm like, okay, we're not wasting this onion. Like,
who was it? I don't remember. Some lady, she was like, it didn't have to be ready right away, but there was some sign that it was in the works. She was more freak out. She was like, I didn't have to stick the oven to an onion. I was going to smell like something in the house. Like, I'm working on it. I'm because it was just like, yeah. Oh, you know, it's just,
it just comes into the food. It's like,
Mom is looking at something like that. I should call her anytime she fights it. I know they will be eating. And she will have made something. And like she had 2 quiches in the oven and she brought them with her. So we had to go back to the quiches before we did have, you know, so she could get to there.
growing up, you're just like, oh yeah, it's fine. I said, but like, no, that's an art form. How did you do that? Like, did you guys do first cards or anything like that?
We also, yeah, we would, as a family, them together. Oh, the little.
Yeah, like the little container ones. Yeah, it's like I had like my mom would do it growing up like you read the table or something. Like we also read the Bible, but like
Give me a ball.
yeah. Like one time, I don't know, my mom heard the gospel. And so one time she like went to a friend's house and you were supposed to memorize them. And so like she was just like at her friend's house like, oh yes, like we do. And yeah, then like they started memorizing pretzels.
Yeah,
Yeah, like they started going to the table and everyone started reciting. She was like, memorize those real quick.
Yes, sir. Hard to leave all those cookies in there. I gotta tell you what. You're welcome. Thanks, buddy.
Like, which is a good thing about
Yeah.
it's that balance of like,
Good. Couple questions and I'll review next week.
First and second one will fall next week, and then behind it,
Okay.
Tower, Ice Age.
All next week.
No, next week will be just Dave. Dave will be first and second one for fall, and the following week the flood. The following week will be Ice Age.
It is really hard to leave oatmeal cookies on a table and come back up here. I don't know about you, but I'm struggling. No, I'm good. I've had enough. Enjoy. I'll need a nap before we get halfway through. We don't want that.
Okay, welcome back.
Jesus for the road, though. I know.
Welcome back. Just before you get started, let me ask Dave to give a quick word on where he was this past week.
Yes, Dave.
Dave was
Just a few minutes ago.
was in Beaufort, South Carolina last weekend. Could you give us just a couple minutes on what's going on there?
Okay, we had this large church, I think it's about 4,000 members, and they had me speak at 2 services. Now, there weren't 4,000 people, of course, there, but it was very interesting. The guy that's the head of this church was a Dallas grad too, and what we're going to do is in April we're going to do one of these seminars, but it'll be a weekend instead of these 6 weeks. It'll be concentrated Friday night and Saturday, and he in the deal, I got a feedback from him afterwards. This was on probably Wednesday or so. And he said, it was unbelievable. I said, what was? This guy is a good preacher, by the way. And he has a good staff of people. And he said, that made a real impact on people. They're raising questions. And he said, we have about 30,000 people that watch that around the world because they've got 30 different stations. There's some in India that stay up to listen to this at night. They have to get up in the nighttime because they're 12 hours off to listen to the services. And he says, well, we're getting an impact. And he says, you already planned that thing for the April get together, so we're going to do that. But let me tell you one short story about this, how powerful these odds are. I was trained, I don't like statistics particularly, but the second law that we are going to talk about next week is based on statistics. It's just that there's so many more states of disorder of any system of matter and energy than there are of order. Einstein felt it was the most absolute law of science because you don't statistically need to have any experimentation. It's just that there's so many more. Well, it was the thing that led to my changing my whole view. I went to Dallas Seminary and I was a theistic evolutionist. But I don't know why they let me in. Anyway, got into a shouting contest with this guy, Jody Dillow, in the bookstore. And he was going against me. And I was arguing for theistic evolution. It was a shouting contest, really, in the bookstore. And Dillow, finally at the end, he says, how do you put this together with the second law? Well, what had happened is I was in a class of only 4 students at MIT, very high powered. We were developing these laws, these 2 basic laws of science that we'll get into next week. And he, in this class, we worked out the probabilities of certain things happening, taught us how to figure out events, whether the probability of those events. Well, there's another guy, myself, George Bernard Shaw said, give me 1,000,000 monkeys, type in 1,000,000 words, 100 words per second, they'll type a play of Shakespeare. Well, this other guy and I, we worked this out. We took a play of Othello, begins with 4-letter words, 3 of them. But for the sake of argument, we assume it's 4 4-letter words. And we took 1,000,000 monkeys, statistically, typing on the keyboard of 40 letters. There's 26 in the alphabet, but you got that many to work with, keyboard. And we worked it out, typing 100 words per minute randomly. How long would it take to get the first word of 4 letters? Well, works out it's about 2 seconds. But we doubled it. 2 words or 8 letters in sequence. Comes out, it's 5 minutes. So we doubled it again. 4 words, 16 letters in sequence. It's 100 million years. So you see the problem of this happening by time and chance, it becomes statistically absurd. And so I called up my professor at MIT, and I said, Professor, I got a problem. You know, I've always been an evolutionist, but we worked out the statistics of taking they said 10 to the 65th atoms in the universe. We took 10 to the 80th, the particles, even took in smaller particles. And worked out the probabilities of all the atoms in the universe and how long would it take to form 1 protein molecule, statistically with time. And we worked it out. We couldn't even get 1 protein molecule by time and chance using all the atoms in the universe in 20 billion years. So I told the professor, I said, this is impossible. I can't even get 1 protein molecule in 20 billion years anywhere in the universe, statistically. And that's if they happen to come together and fix, which is very unlikely. But we assumed that if that combination came, they would come together and whole. And then the professor said, well, he says, yeah, it's a real problem. And he said, but what's your choice? Special creation? He says, that's philosophically unacceptable. And I said, Professor, as you know, I'm not interested in philosophy, I'm interested in science. I said, scientifically, it's not possible. And he says, well, I've got other things to do, and that was into that conversation. Nice guy, but they know these things at higher levels. And so I had to chuck my theistic evolutions at that point, and I became more serious about the science.
Thank you, Dave. Look forward to next week. I, like Keith, who mentioned this evening as he came in, have really benefited from having my understanding of the special revelation of God, the Word of God, being underscored and upheld by the stuff that we see in the general revelation around us. And so if you would continue on that way, Dan, we won't be seeing as much scripture in this presentation, but evolution, take it away.
No, but we can talk about it. What do all those creatures on the screen represent? Anybody know? Think a guess?
extinction?
Yeah, these are all animals we thought were completely extinct, that we found out they were alive. And they all look like Ayla did, supposedly hundreds and hundreds of millions of years later. Exactly. That's a problem if you're an evolutionist, like I was. So, guys, Charles Darwin, go back to the beginning. We look about 1835. He goes down to South America, off the Falkland Islands, and over to the Galapagos. Oops, go back one for you there. And he goes on the Beagle, and he's hunting for scientific discovery, probably not necessarily looking for evolution per se, but definitely looking for evidence of animals kind of procreating or creating new kinds of animals without any special intervention. First thing he sees are a bunch of finches running around, and while he's there, he notices that some of the finches, their beaks change. Of course, if he'd have stuck around to spring, he'd say that their beaks change back the other way. Because what they do is they beef up in the fall, and then when the time of the year when the seeds get hard, they kind of calcify it, get bigger, so they can eat the seed. You know, he didn't stick around to spring to see that, hey, you know, they went back, you know, they kind of wore their calcium back off. But that didn't matter. Basically, he noticed finch beaks change. And he used the scientific method. If you go to school, they teach you this thing called the scientific method. It goes back, you know, Isaac Newton is kind of one of the first proponents of this kind of model. But it's basically, you look and see things. You ask questions about what you see. And from those questions, you say, well, can I test maybe an idea, a hypothesis, an idea of what I think is happening? And then once I can come up with that, I can then test my prediction based on the evidence that I get. And I keep collecting this data and evidence, and I ask if this hypothesis or this guess is true. And if it isn't, I change the hypothesis and I go through this again. Now, this is basically what you're taught in school. And, you know, and so let's just look at what his method. His method was, well, I see these beaks and these finches changing. But I'm going to propose, do these things actually turn into a different kind of an animal? A new life form over time? Right? Will the sciences confirm this? Observational science, genetics, paleontology, archaeology, biology, all of the science disciplines, do they confirm my hypothesis? And one of the things he thought he would find, and we would find, as they were discovering fossils, was, hey, we should start seeing some fossils of one animal turning over time into a new animal, a different kind of animal. Not just a variety of the same animal, a species of the same animal, but do these finches turn into, you know, some other animal over time? And this is actually where he started, and you can see in his journals he was thinking, and he's diagramming how these finches, their beaks were changing. And he drew this little picture, what he called natural selection. But his first pillar of his belief system was something called common descent. We all came from a single-celled amoeba. And over time, that became different forms of animals. And then those different forms of animals evolved into monkeys or man-like monkeys, and from goo to zoo to you, basically, like Kevin would have told. His second one was, well, maybe things mutate over time, and therefore, as they mutate over time, they actually become something more special than the previous generation. They actually benefit from mutating. Okay? But unfortunately, if I told you, hey man, you know, you're carrying a bunch of mutations around, you know that's bad news, right? We know that, right? But he thought, well, you know, somehow. But the biggest problem is, hey, I got a beneficial mutation today. How do I give that today? I can't. That's the biggest problem. You can't, in a population, you can't share beneficial mutations rapidly enough for them to make a difference. That's just genetic computations and things like we'll tell you that. But he believed, okay, so there's this first term you'll hear, common descent. The second one you'll hear is natural selection, survival of the fittest. You know, we get stronger over time and we evolve into some, you know, half insect creature or something over time. That's kind of what he was thinking. You know, we're going to see natural selection and beneficial mutations are going to make us into some new animal. And then he had adaptation. Well, this was more of a microevolutionary understanding. So within a family or genus of animals, they can adapt and change. Yeah, we see that, and we'd agree to some of that perspective. But you're going to hear, if you're in school, you're going to hear common descent, natural selection, and adaptation. They're all completely different. This is the only one that even is remotely true, as long as you stay within a kind, and we're going to study what that means. Okay? But these other ones you're going to see, they just don't work. He predicted that goo, amoeba, through zoo, where's our lemurs, to lemurs, would become over time you. That's what he predicted. We'll find, this is Haeckel's Tree of Life, he and Haeckel were peers. This is produced in his books and whatnot. But when we look at the first scientific discipline, genetics, and we start getting these atomic microscopes and we can see the details of not just DNA, but these molecular machines, and we can actually see the DNA now that he could never have seen or imagined. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. Although he doesn't have any due to him when you see the very end of this presentation. But we can see that amoebas have DNA that make them amoebas. And guess what? They've always been amoebas. They didn't change. They're still the same. In fact, one of the first studies that was done was a study on lemur DNA. Why? Because lemurs were always believed to be kind of transitional in nature. You know, they kind of look like a monkey and a raccoon, and you know, you can just see, yeah, that could be a nice animal that I could say changed from something to something else, right? Well, guess what came back from the DNA studies and the genetic studies of lemurs? They all came from a common lemur. They've always been lemurs. 23andMe. Can't be wrong. These guys, right? Or Ancestry.com. Guess what? You're all 99.9 and then some, exactly the same. You human guys and gals. Therefore, you are all one kind. Right? You're all the same. In fact, what we see are basically an orchard of life. You know, canids and amphibians and certain types of birds and even chimps. Yeah, they're in their chimp kind. I mean, they've always been chimps. This is what we see. We don't see Haeckel's Tree of Life. We see an orchard of life by kind. Where have you heard that story before? Genesis chapter 1, everything was created by its. And they produce and procreate according to their. Does that happen for trees? Do acorns become mangoes? Do mango trees? Do you know cats become dogs? No. Just think about how stupid we have. Just think about how smart we have to get that stupid. Romans 1:20. Let's look at what genetics are teaching us, and this you have to understand. Too, some of you younger guys and gals here, we didn't understand DNA like this. We didn't know that Lucy's DNA in the bones showed she was just a fat chimp. We had no idea. We didn't have that information. So we're thinking, yes, monkeys become guys over time. So now that we have this information, it's just roasting Darwinian evolution. Here, let's just watch a little of this.
Actually, I believe genetics is the most powerful argument against evolution. And the reason is that when you look at the genes of things, I mean, they're transmitted and passed on generation to generation, but the changes you see, the mutations, actually destroy the genes.
biologist does is actually it studies the genetics, the genetic information, the transfer of genetic information, the control of genetic information, or in my field, biotechnology, how to change that intelligently to create something novel. Darwinism has nothing to do with that. The random approach produces nothing. Randomness cannot compete with intelligence in understanding nature.
I organized a symposium at Cornell University, and the topic was biological information. And all of the scientists agreed on one thing, and that is that information is fundamental to our understanding what life is. Information is, in a sense, what makes life life. And I'm not just talking about information like data. I'm talking about information networks, communication networks within the cell.
One of the most amazing information transfer systems in a cell involves the way proteins are encoded in and decoded from strands of DNA. Starting out with these long, fragile, sticky strings of DNA, an amazing machine called an RNA polymerase zips down the strand, opens up the coils, and copies the DNA into another molecule called RNA. Now, RNA uses a slightly different language convention. It still has 4 letters like DNA, but instead of A, C, G, and T, it has A, C, G, and U. The RNA then leaves the nucleus and another amazing machine attaches to it. It's called a ribosome, and it is in charge of translating from the language of the RNA with its 4 letter bases to the language of proteins with their 20 different amino acids. 3 bases in the bottom of the tRNA match to 3 letter groups in the RNA. On the other end are amino acids which pop off as they're attached to the growing protein strand. But the process isn't finished because most proteins need help folding properly. And that's facilitated by little molecules called chaperones. They attach to and protect the unfolded protein as it's transported to a watermelon-shaped molecule called a chaperonin, which folds the protein into its final form. From DNA to protein is an incredibly complex process that uses precise and complex machines to translate between 2 completely unrelated languages, the linear code of the DNA world to the 3-dimensional code of the protein world.
If we look into these complexities and into these codes in the genome and in the working together, the operating system in the cells, then it is very hard to exclude that there hasn't been intelligence behind it. And I think that is what the creationists recognize in these systems.
How did this incredible communication network that's even present in the simplest cell, how did it arise? Well, you need 3 things for it to arise. Number 1, you need a language. You can't even conceive of a communication system until there's a language, because there's senders and receivers in the cell. Secondly, you need communication channels or networks. It's still a bit like the hardware that enables the internet. And thirdly, you have to have meaningful information that is being translated into language and communicated through the channels of communication.
Information is at the heart of cellular function. Did you know the cell even has a post office? They're these specialized molecules called kinesins, and they're in charge of delivering packets of material to different parts of the cell. But in their journey, they go to pre-specified destinations. Without that addressing system, the cell couldn't even work.
Information, communication, and language. They're non-material entities. They arise through intelligence, and they're mutually defining. So you can't have one without the other. They all have to arise at the same time.
That is a major problem for materialists like us. You can't get language. You can't get information from material. It doesn't happen. So you're missing like half of all things, and then not even bringing into the things that are above nature, the supernatural things, even epigenetics, which genetics also have a layer called epigenetics. Epi just means like on top of like your epidermis, right? So they did these studies with mice, and they found at Georgia State University they could take these mice and they could give them a smell of cherry blossoms and then give them a little shock, And so, you know, you can imagine what happened when they smelled cherry blossoms. The mice were like, dude, what's going to happen here, right? So these mice had babies. And as soon as the babies were born, they took those mice and they gave them to different parents in different cages, not exposed to any of this. And the little baby mice, raised by other mouse parents, when they smell cherry blossoms, guess what they do? Dude, so something above the information that speaks a lot to like why people would deal with environmentally driven problems, right? Because you actually can pass on things that we don't even understand how it gets carried along in the DNA information. That's above. It's like chemical reactions at a neuro level above the information to just make another you or another cell. You know what I'm saying? It's crazy what's going on in these studies that we've learned, that is in this data. What Sanford's talking about is all these non-material things you have to make these systems work. Most of them are not material. The material things are ridiculously complex and built enough, but it's all the other stuff, the information, the languages. Do you know that, you know, your A, T, C, and G, you got your 4 letters when we're talking about DNA? Do you know that your body doesn't even use, the cells don't even use all 4 at the same time. They only use 3 of those 4 in different combinations. They're called codons, and so there's just like 3 little triplets of these things. And then the RNA uses a different letter string. And those 2 things have to come together to say, okay, now's the time, go over there and do that. And so there's a communication system between both languages going at the same time. It's just, you know, God is just ridiculous at what he's up to here. So we know common descent is a failure because we can see amoebas and single-celled animals don't rise from where they are. I mean, genetically, they stay the same. We also know from a natural selection perspective that mutations within kinds of animals don't really yield anything improving. In fact, they can only give you short-term gain and long-term extinctions, what we've learned over decades of study of this. And so we're going to talk about this. So these guys were all living fossils. That's what we call these. So here we have an elephant shrew. Guess what we thought he evolved into? An elephant, that's right. But the big problem is South Africa, they started finding elephant shrews. And there's no fossil evidence whatsoever that elephants have never been anything but elephants, right? And in India, they're smaller, their ears are smaller. I think they're a lot kinder than African elephants because I've actually been around them. But they're elephants, man. I mean, there's different species of elephant, but they're all elephants. Horseshoe crabs, they're Cambrian, so you find them with trilobites in the lowest levels of the geologic column. But, you guys see these all the time. You go to the beach about anywhere. Nautilus here, ammonites, known as ammonites, a Philippine Sea. We thought they were completely gone until Jacques Cousteau and other guys started finding them in the Philippine Sea. The reason why you can't find some of these animals, or we hadn't seen them, is because they live in such a narrow band of temperatures. In the 70-degree, 72-degree water, and they'll actually go down 700 feet and come up to 200 feet at night and go back down again and feed. And they stay at these levels so that they can feed and also survive based on the way they're made. They have these little cells inside of them that they fill and release water out of to kind of control their depth and whatnot. They're fascinating creatures, but yeah, they're alive and well. So when we do the flood presentation, some of you may even go home with a fossil ammonite. Do anybody know what this one is? Coelacanth, the dino fish. How did he stay the same over 70 million years? Because it hasn't been 70 million years for one thing. The other thing is, the fish in the sea during the flood, did they get wiped out? Some of them did with the hot steams of the deep springs of the deep bursting, but no. Find them in the Indian Ocean all the time now. Now that we know what we're looking for and where they live, they look exactly the same. So back in 2013, we got to over 3,241 over 2.5 million-year-old animals, we thought, that were all exactly the same today as we see in the fossil record. That was the last report I can find by the paleontology database people, paleobiology. They quit doing this report. Do you know how many there are now? Roughly, we know that there were over 19,000 just a few years ago that were cataloged. And that doesn't, this kind of also includes plants too, like Carolina fern and some of the others. You're like, wow, they're still here. Some of these ferns look just like Kimberly ferns that you buy at Walmart, right, in the summer. You know, the big, huge at home. You guys, anybody else buy Kimberly ferns? Yeah, you know. Hey, they look the same 50 million years later. Imagine that. Okay, so let's talk about all or nothing systems. So these are my favorite ones. There's a book called Billions of Missing Links. It's written by a medical doctor that I really like. And he has a real, he really has fun with this because he's just become a believer in the last few years. So he's really like, wow, check this out. Some of the most mundane little fossils we find in the lowest record of the Cambrian level are barnacles. Do you guys have boats? Anybody have a boat in here? You know, the two happiest days of a boat owner? The day you buy it and the day you get rid of it. That's right. Hey man, I had a fishing boat with my brother when I grew up out in the desert and stuff. We loved that thing. I'd take it back in a heartbeat. But I guess, you know, these high dollar ones or something else. So anyways, go back here. You got a preview there. Okay, so barnacles are fascinating. They have no relatives. They show up fully formed, but they have some of the coolest stuff going on and you would never know it. First of all, this little guy off here, you can see, here's a little baby of a larva barnacle, and he's out swimming around, and he goes and he's finding his way around, and when he finds where he thinks is the perfect home, he starts setting himself up for life, and he sprays out of two little jets here on his body, an oily lipid primer and a phosphoprotein. And they are just happen to be the exact combination of chemicals. By chance, over billions of years? No, they look exactly the same today as they did then. To give a 7,000 pound per square inch, 3/10,000th of an inch is all the more depth of his little epoxy bond that'll support over 7,000 pounds. And he does it underwater. And he did this since the Cambrian with no relatives. No fossil evidence, nothing. Here he is. Now, who wants to get some of that underwater epoxy protein? Come on. What about an egg? Any guys raise chickens? No? Think about the design of the chicken egg. 10,000 pores, designed with an outward expression and an inward for its basically breathing. These 17 micrometer in diameter portals across this thing are designed in just such a way to take in 6 liters of oxygen over a 21-day period and express 4.5 liters of carbon dioxide and other gases that it doesn't want to have in there with the animal, all while not letting water get inside the egg and kill the animal. And structured in such a way you can't break into it if you're a chicken, but you can break out of it if you have an egg tube. Think about that. And there's just enough protein, food, oxygen input, just enough space for a chick to form over 21 days. It's exactly like I said, hey, man, I'm going to put en route in a SpaceX ship. You know, Elon, we're tight. You know, Elon and me. So you're going to go on a 21-day journey, and you're going to have everything you need for 21 days. Enough to get you home and all the oxygen and water, just exactly what you need. At the end of 21 days, that's it. You're dead if we don't get home. Okay? It's exactly the same. What happens here is this chick will go through his process and he will consume everything within the egg. And he forms his egg tooth beginning on the 8th day. And it takes 13 days for an egg tooth to form, so that on the 21st day, when he's filled up the entire egg, little chicken can peck his way out. If any one of those elements was changed just a tiny bit, there would have been no second chicken. We're not even talking about the hen that made the egg. Just the egg. Do you understand the complexity that has gone into this? No more space beyond 21 days. Egg tooth doesn't show up just right, perfect. Chickie can't get out. He just dies in there. Just like Amaru would get up on SpaceX. He'd ran out of oxygen if we went 22 days. He's toast. How in the world do we have these all or nothing systems like this with these complex chemical things, this capacity? And he can only get out of this egg from the inside out, and it takes a special tooth to do it, and it just so happens it all happens at the same moment in time. That's ridiculous design. We would never question that the SpaceX mission had a designer behind it. What in the world are we thinking, that these things happen by chance? We've been taught that for so long, we just kind of live, well, whatever. But I'm telling you, next time you see a chicken egg, think about that. There could be no second chicken unless all that happened. What about these usual suspects? See these in the textbook? What have we learned in the last 20 years about Piltdown Man? Well, that guy did some time. It was a human skull that he had dyed with acid bath and forged, and said, yeah, I found this transitional guy here in England. And it turned out he was just forging a human skull to give us Piltdown Man. You might even still see that one in a school book. I don't know. I remember this one because I remember him in my school books. Nebraska Man. They found a tooth in Nebraska. The problem was they built this whole, prehistoric man out of the tooth compared to a man to kind of figure out his jaw size, and they extrapolated him. And then DNA comes along, and we found out in 1980 it was a pig's tooth. That's just information we didn't know, Hey, you're laughing back there, Vicki, because you heard about Nebraska Man in your school book. He was a pig's tooth, and they hooked us on that. What about Neanderthal, the Neander Valley guy? Hey, his genetics are still in the human population. This is a human that had certain traits, strength, stature, whatnot, escaped into caves in Europe to survive the Ice Age, which Dave will talk about in a few weeks after the flood. So he'll do first and second laws in the fall next week, quality and quantity, those laws. Then the following week, we're going to do the flood. And then the week after that, we're going to do the Ice Age and the tower. See, this Ice Age is, you need a flood to get this Ice Age. We got the best answer for that for you. And everybody's going to move to the equator during the Ice Age. And these poor guys get trapped and live in caves for a while. They're not stupid cavemen. They're just guys that survived in caves. And their genetics are in the population today. And so we're starting to learn that, hey, Neanderthal Man is just a guy with certain genetic traits we find in the population all over the world. This is a guy, it's a people group that has certain traits to them that ended up in wherever humans are. We find them all over the world. Lucy was my favorite. I had that National Geographic. It was my Bible when I was a little evolutionist. I believed Lucy was the answer. Turns out, no. 2010, we found out that her hips had been manipulated. She didn't stand up like that. She was a knuckle walker. She was a chimp. And notice she never had any hands or feet, but all the little models all have all that. They also have her standing straight up, which she didn't because of the pelvis, we know. And now we have some DNA analysis that shows she's definitely an extinct form of chimpanzee. She probably weighed about 40 pounds, and she died by falling out of a tree. So out of all of that, we had a 40-pound chimp that fell out of a tree, but we've been told, oh, she's it. Yeah, I mean, were you told about Lucy? Oh, yeah, that's you, man. I mean, that's Grandma. No. Hogwash, literally, with Nebraska man. So when you look at all of these different types, you see these words. Now, so I was really fascinated by all this. I made little models, and I was just really into this. But Australopithecus is Lucy. It's an extinct ape from the chimp species family, kind of a subspecies of chimps. Little stockier. Not as good at climbing trees. That's why they're extinct. Neanderthals are just humans. Genetic evidence shows us that they're all over the human population. The genetics that we found within these Neanderthal bones, they're fully human. They're just guys that lived and gals that lived in caves to survive. Okay? And you know how people, when they cloister together like languages, they look alike because the Punnett squares line up, the genetics are just the same because they just hang out with all those kind of people that speak their language and things, and they start looking and are more alike. Well, that's all these guys were and gals. Heidelbergensis is another form of Neanderthals, another one like it's another fully human. They found around Heidelberg, Germany, as opposed to Austria. The same anatomically big humans. And then Homo habilis. Habilis is my favorite one because I remember this one. So if you were a paleontologist and you had a bunch of monkey bones you dug up, and you had some real ancient human bones, and if you had little scraps of both, you just kind of kept them together and said, it's the grab bag. It's the grab bag. So if you needed a transitional ape kind of human thing, you could, it's a Homo habilis, which means I don't really know what I've got here, but I think it might be transitional species. So I found another habilis. I found the hobbits, right, in Indonesia. Well, these poor guys, they had an extreme deficiency in niacin or one of the minerals. And so they were short little people. I mean, that was it. They're people. They were just short, right? But this is the same type of model. But we used to call it, a grab bag. Because this is where we would go to say, well, if you couldn't prove any of these, you could go here and say, here's a transitional half ape, half man. It's this Homo habilis. But understand that this is where all the fake stuff comes out of, too. But if you are not wanting God in your life and you're an evolutionist, this is your best friend because you can grab pieces of bone from both worlds and try and say, yes, here's my evidence, here it is. But the problem is you're dealing with either an extinct ape or a fully human in that grab bag. We don't have any transitionals. It certainly wasn't any of these. Pat's question. 2009, you're 98% chimp. Why do I need 98%? Because 2% is the extent of the range to call something from the same kind. So I'm hunting for 2% difference. So how did we get here? You got 2.4 billion letters over here on the human side. I got 2.4 billion letters over here on the monkey side. But I got a bunch of letters that don't match. So how do I get to 98%? This is how you do it. You ignore 18% of chimp DNA and cut out 25% of the human to get to 98, and that's true. But it's still in a textbook. There's wonderful videos on this, fully exposed as false. Not true. You are not 98% chimp. In fact, all of the junk DNA, what they would call junk DNA, they're starting to find does all kinds of crazy cool stuff that we didn't even know. That's not even necessarily included in this. Does that help you, Pat? That's the truth of the matter right there. Great video on this too, you can find it. I think it's probably on YouTube. I think Genesis Apologetics did a good job on this one. But this is just fraudulent. So how much alike are you really if you're the same kind? If we're all the same kind, humankind, how much alike really are we?
The biblical view on race. While the Bible's take on race has remained constant since it was written, many have run astray with false interpretations, and some of these were driven by impure motives. But a plain reading through Scripture reveals there were two humans created at the beginning in the image of God, and not in the image of apes. Indeed, Adam was not one of the animals. Rather, God had him name the animals and then take dominion over them. Adam and Eve's DNA was perfect. Their genome included all the necessary programming for the variability that we see today in various people groups. Some of the differences we observe with people today are also due to mutations that began compounding after the fall. The genealogies in Genesis provide a clear map to Adam about 6,000 years ago. Interestingly, secular research on mitochondrial DNA mutation rates actually confirms this biblical timeline, demonstrating that we all come from a single woman who lived only about 6,000 years ago. This mutation rate is even used by the FBI in forensic investigations. Then, just 10 generations after Adam and Eve, the entire human genome was bottlenecked to just 8 people who survived the year-long flood. This genetic bottleneck is at least partially responsible for the shortened lifespans of those who lived after the flood. The post-flood population increased quickly and was later dispersed as over 70 language groups spread around the globe after God confused their languages at Babel. Genesis 10:32 records, "These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood." Recent scientific studies even confirm there was explosive human population growth and DNA variability that occurred about this same time period. The New Testament also confirms God's plan to spread the nations over the earth, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Are there differences between people groups today? Of course. The variety we see in people today, which exists both within and between people groups, is because of the pre-engineered adaptability that God established within the language of our DNA. Some of the differences we see are also due to mutations, or DNA copying mistakes. But the traits we typically use to categorize race groups are superficial, such as differences in skin, hair, and eye color. These traits account for less than 0.012% of human genetic differences, or one gene out of 12,000.
Uh-oh. That means, I hate to tell you this, there really aren't any races. There's just one race, the human race, and there's just one kind of humans, humankind. Now, we have some variation between us all. You know, hair, skin, whatever. By the way, if you have blue eyes, raise your hand. You're a mutant. You're a mutant. How about if you like to drink milk? Okay, if you're younger than 15, drop your hand. Wait, you're not younger than 15. Wait. If you're younger than 15, keep your hand down to see who's awake, actually. No. If you're an adult and you like milk, raise your hand. Mutant. I'll tell you why. Because the systems within your body were designed to stop you from drinking milk when you became of age. You went through puberty. That's supposed to be turned off. But we've mutated, so we continue to like milk and drink it and tolerate it. That's a mutation. You see, these are all things that we now know we didn't know before, but you're all this. By the way, what is a kind? We're going to get over that in a minute here, but I got to move quickly now that we're coming down the stretch here. I want to talk about natural selection, though. You know, do mutations equal something positive over time? Actually, they can give some small burst benefits to a small group of kinds of animals. But over time, it usually leads to extinction. I'll explain why here in just a minute. So, do you think that the bacterial flagellum, this little guy we talked about earlier over here, is designed? Look, he's got a clutch and a U-joint, and he's going 100,000 RPM. And then, in a quarter turn, he goes 100,000 RPM the other direction. Go down K7 tonight, go about 120 miles an hour, throw your car in reverse. That's what this bad boy does all day long. And he is so small, you need an atomic microscope to see him. That's this guy. Bats, natural selection, did he just over time become this propulsion system? No, he shows up that way. Bats, sonar navigation, catch 1,000 mosquitoes an hour in perfect darkness, no transitional species, show up just like that in the fossil record. He came out just flying around eating mosquitoes. We could use a lot more of those. Bombardier beetles, 2 chemicals here, right? Notice he's got a peroxide. Where is it? Does it say it on here? Yeah, he's got hydrogen peroxide on one side of him, and then another quinone of site, a hyperquinone on the other side. But the combination of these two things generates a 200-degree chemical response. And his little predators coming after him to eat him, birds or whatever, he sprays this on them and it scorches them and they leave him alone. But what if he just evolutionarily, over natural selection, over time, like the barnacle, had the wrong chemicals here? He'd have just blown up, you know. But the tanks weren't just right, the nozzles weren't just right, he'd have just blown himself up the very first time. But no, he comes out showing up just like this. We find bombardier beetles. Probably one of my favorite ones are these salmon. We have these salmon that come into Lake Michigan, and they come from the ocean, and they build a dam in the 40s, and they can't get back to the ocean, so they're euryhaline. They can handle salt levels high and low to go with freshwater and saltwater. But this species of salmon, they adapt to get into here. It's not a natural selection moment. They actually adapt, and they lose the function of handling high salt. So they mutate and they lose information in their DNA to be able to do that. And so they have this ability to handle fresh water but not salt anymore. Guess what happened when the dam opened up? Salmon dinner, that's what happened. Lots of salmon dinner for all of us. They couldn't survive in the salt water. Natural selection has short-term gain in some instances, has death to the end for mutations, especially like polar bears, right? We came from brown bears. If you have a brown bear and a white bear, and they, if you have a brown bear and they mutate over time to be a polar bear and they have higher metabolism, they have to eat blubber, they live in cold weather climate, they can't survive on berries and things, you know, that their original kind, that where they came from, their original kind that they speciated from, they can't survive. They had a short-term gain to survive. Now the temperature's changing. These polar bears can't survive in their environment where they're at, so they're moving southward and trying to hang out with the brown bears again where they originally came from. Can a polar bear, no matter how many times polar bears mate with brown bears, can they ever go back to their original kind of brown bear? No, why? Because they lost information when they propagated that way. Just like if you have a cockapoo, you know, you can breed that cockapoo with poodles, or vice versa, or cocker spaniels, back and forth as many times as you want, but you can never get back to the original kind because you lose information every time you have these mutations. Okay? You lose information. You don't gain information. They didn't understand that, so natural selection is toast. How about adaptation? Do animals change over time? What is a kind? Okay, I'm going to give you this. This is free of charge tonight only. Male and female of a group of animals or creatures that they themselves can have offspring, that their offspring can have babies too. That's a kind. What happens if you move to the other side of the world, marry somebody, and have kids? You could do that. You know why? You're the same kind. You're humankind. Do you think that it's possible that a bear of a certain type can go hang out with another bear and they can have cubs? Yes, because they're all bears. The kinds generally, from a biological scale, King's Play chestnut, fine green sand, using that method, it's usually from the fine green sand on down. this is the area where cats you can have tigers and lions can breed, and they have ligers. It's true. Just like Napoleon Dynamite, you can have a liger out of that. Different kinds of bobcats, wildcats. They're all from that Felidae kind, and so they're all from this family and genus, and they can have different species. So what we do see is what the Bible tells us we should see. All these animals are in their kinds, and they can speciate within their kinds. That's where we would agree with adaptation if you're talking about evolution. Common descent, not even possible. Natural selection, short-term gain, long-term extinction. No way. And I can't give my great trait that I just mutated, I can't give it to Dave to help him. That's the biggest problem with natural selection. It doesn't hold any water, and genetics blow it away that it never happened. But adaptation within a kind, yeah. You can get different kinds of finches, but they're all finches. They don't turn into parrots. You know, that's a different kind of bird, right? Penguins, they're still penguins over time. So I think Neil had this right when he said, that's one small step for a man and a giant leap for, we don't use that word anymore. Why not? If somebody's up to dividing you in this world, I'm going to tell you right now, and it's a spiritual question. Some entity is behind dividing you up to take you down as a people. And it's not God. But this word used to be common in the 60s for all mankind. Your kids don't even know what this word is. You are all the same kind. And there aren't races. There's just people groups. And hey, that guy looks different to me, so maybe he's a different race. No, that all came from somewhere else. And I'm going to tell you where it came from. By the way, if this Airedale hangs out with this collie, can they have pups? Can they have pups? Yeah, why? Because they're all dog kind. They're all canids, right? That's it. You can have species, but you're still the same kind, and they never change into a cat. Never happened. You saw this on Animal Night. You're going to see it again. Think about what God has done with speciation within kinds, and notice how all these things are still in their kinds even today. Look around. Observational science. adaptation within a kind to this day. So if you're dealing with somebody like I was, or an evolutionist, you're talking about common descent, because there's no way we all came from a single cell animal. Genetics tells that. Well, are you talking about natural selection? Why, if that's true, how come all these animals that have mutated, like polar bears, they're all dying? That's not beneficial. And how would I share positive mutations from one animal to the next on the other side of the world? You can't do that. We never have seen a new animal come out of natural selection in recorded history. And we're the fossil record, or genetics tell us that. But we can see adaptation as long as you're talking about a family or a genus. You see species within a kind, but they never ever become a new life form. That's hogwash. So now you're schooled on the 3 forms of evolution. Most people that are evolutionists, they just don't want God, so they're just buying into anything they can, but they're grabbing at these 3. But you can say, you mean common descent? Nah, bro, there's no way. But what about natural selection? No. Beneficial mutations? No, that just leads to extinction over time. You know, look at, does anybody in here have like a Cocker Spaniel or a Cockapoo or something like that? Anybody have dogs? What do you have?
Sheepdog poodle.
A shoodle.
Sheepadoodle.
A sheepadoodle. Does that dog have, can you ever make that dog a sheepdog again and a poodle again? No, because you lost all that information every time they bred that dog down to that. But there's probably some genetic traits that are mutations in that dog from the original canid kind that it has lost information, that it cannot be as healthy as it could have been. Just imagine that, what animals would be like without all the mutations for humans. That's what we're dealing with. So let's just go back and we're going to visit our end. We're coming down the stretch here. Did those beaks change? Yeah, they did. Did they turn into something new? No, they're still finches. Even today, you go to the Galapagos, guess what they have there? Finches. That's right. Does science confirm this testable hypothesis? They become new animals? No, quite the opposite. And over the 100 and some years, it's even gotten worse. You know, all the things we've tested against it, everything we were looking for. Did we change our hypothesis with Darwinian evolution with either natural selection or common descent? Did we change our hypothesis? No. Why? I'm going to tell you why, and it's shocking. Okay, it won't shock you, actually. You'll be like, of course, that's why he did that. But no, we didn't. Do you know what this really means? This thing wasn't even a good hypothesis. You didn't even get to a theory, the theory of evolution. No. There's nothing testable in this hypothesis that makes sense or truth if you're objective about it. But, so what do you say? What's the evidence say? We say, no, not possible. Only adaptation and only within a kind, which is species. That's it. No new animals out of that process. So why? Well, that's why. So Darwin wrote this book, right? His very first one here. The origin of species by means of natural selection, survival of the fittest. Everything's getting better all the time. But what was his secondary title? What's it say? For the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Where did racism come from? This thing, from evolution. It's not in the Bible. Read Acts chapter 17. One race of man, one blood of man. He made all of us. So get over it. You're 99.998% the same as any other human. You can marry anybody you want in this world as another human and have kids. And guess what those kids can do? They can grow up and have kids because they're all the same kind. You're human kind. Here he is. Australians, Mongolians, Africans, Indians, South Americans, Polynesians, Eskimos are to be classified as savages. Anything non-white Euro. Well, I'm not even Euro. I've got some Iberian, which is Spain and North Africa, and me, so I guess I'm a savage. Anyway, the savage races have lower morality, insufficient powers of reasoning, weak power of self-command. 1871, The Descent of Man. That's his next book he's going to come out with after this. What was this guy all about? He was all about racism and division. And so the Constitution of the Confederate States actually picks up on this, uses it as their argument for slavery. It's part of some of those articles you can read about. And here we have Hitler, who uses this thing to say this about the Jews, and he kills 6 million people for this. Oh, dude, if you're an evolutionist, this is your heritage right here. Not only is it not scientific, but, you know, you're a major hater. I mean, you're actually trying to divide the world up to take advantage of it. And so that's where I was. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but if you're here and you believe in Darwinian evolution in some way, or support that mindset, or God used evolution. No, he didn't. He's made everything by its kind, it stayed its kind, and even trees today, when seeds fall, they grow the same kind of tree. That's how it was made. That's what the science tells you, genetics, everything. He himself says, you know, it's just absolutely silly to think about the eye happening by chance, especially with these corrective features that it has, its spherical nature, how it picks up colors and makes all this stuff. I think, I have to confess, that's just absurd to the highest degree. Now, he himself said that. What else did he say? Hey, if animals descended from others in fine gradations, in other words, natural selection, we saw giraffes turn into elephants over time, or shrews, elephant shrew, mice turn into elephants. Then how come we don't see innumerable transitional forms everywhere? And this was in 1880. You know, we've never seen any. You know, we're a long way from 1880. We're 150 years later, we still don't have any of these things. This is the true implication, though, of why genetics tell us that there was a fall that Dave's going to talk about next week, and that why God had to intervene, or would there be no hope for us. This is why this is so important. Now, I hope you know a lot more about evolution than you did when you came in here tonight. I hope you know about what the difference between natural selection and a common descent from an amoeba is, and adaptations. And I hope you know what a kind is, and you realize you're all just the same kind in the room here. Sorry, get over it. We're all humankind. And I want you to see John Sanford, Human Genome Project's testimony, who was not a believer, becomes a believer studying the human genome and realizes what mutations are doing to us.
The problem is so fundamental that just increasing selection pressure does not solve it. It doesn't even come close to solving it. This is the essence of aging. And so one of the things that Michael Lynch in his recent paper mentioned was, he said, because of the nature of this degenerative process in our own body, there is no prospect for any type of scientific breakthrough to significantly extend our lifespan beyond what it is. That's really fundamental, and it's very personal, because we are experiencing genetic entropy personally. No one can contest that. Personal genetic entropy is an uncontestable fact that no scientist on the planet can deny, because it is why we die. And so what's happening is every gene in every chromosome of every cell in my body is mutated. And so that guarantees my aging and my death. But the problem is that these mutations that are accumulated in my body, some of them are transmitted to my children. And so, in fact, I take the genes, all the mutations that I inherited from my ancestors, which is tens of thousands of deleterious mutations in my body, and then I add my own contribution to that, about 100 new mutations at least, and pass it on to the next generation. So what we have here is not only this deep, kind of a personal tragedy, this is what causes us to die, but it's passed on to our children. And so it's a tragedy for all of humanity, and it keeps getting worse. It means that we are perishing people living in a dying world. And that is so profound, and so it makes the need for salvation and a Savior so personal and so immediate, because there's no circle of life where things just keep staying the same, and it's not an upward spiral of evolution, things keep getting better and better. It is a downward spiral, exactly as described in Scripture. And so it's my research, I thought, would, I realized it had major implications for evolution, but I had no, I couldn't have guessed how profound the biblical implications are, how profoundly the evidence supports the biblical perspective of a dying universe and a dying world, and that we are dying because of the fall, and that we desperately, our only hope is Christ.
That is power. From a guy who came into this not even as a believer. But never forget Galatians 3:28. Spurgeon said it this way: Jesus is the greatest union of God and man, the opportunity for union between God and man himself. At the same time, he's the source of the greatest divisions in the world. And I love this, that we're reading this in the New Testament, right? 2,000 years ago, we're seeing that there's really, it doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy or where you came from or if you're a Greek or a Jew, you're all the same to Jesus. It doesn't matter. He's got this right. Just like Acts 17 says, through one blood he made us all. And by the way, we saw Acts chapter 17, verse 26, determine the time and the boundaries of which you live. He said you're going to be here tonight. He said you're going to live next to that neighbor that you guys don't like very much that you need to pray for. He said he's going to put you through all these things, give you the people that you deal with every day. Why? That you might reach for him, though he's never far from any of you. That's the next verse, 27, Acts chapter 17. Good, something to read. Thank you, guys. I want you to know that you are all made special, but you're all the same kind. And so evolution is far from anything possible with the exception of adaptation. And Steve, you've got something to say for the end of the night here, don't you? Okay, well, okay. So next week, Dave's going to have the chair up here, and he's going to talk to you about the first and second laws of science. He's going to wrap up what the fall does to us. And there's some information they're going to pass out for you guys, so you can be ready for that.
Okay, the lesson plan for next week.
Here we go.
We've got a couple minutes yet. This will be session 4 next week, and we'll be dealing with the fall. Your assignments on here include read the Bible, Genesis chapter 3, an account of the fall. And then the New Answers book, right here. It's got a chapter on it regarding death and suffering. And then the global flood, this excellent big blue book here that's got pretty pictures in it, and I really enjoy reading this one. It's laid out so that as you're reading along, there will be a full page article on a specific thing. Like this past week, there was an article by Humphreys, I've forgotten his first name, on the speed of light, and Dave will have more to say about that next week as well. And then finally, strengthening your faith. There's a video on the website that Dave gives that's in the assignments as well. Okay. Thank you very much for your work, Dan. And next week, the team will be back. Steve McElwain will be here. So you're all dismissed. Have a good night.
Thank you guys for your time. Appreciate you.